So the criticism of the New York Times emissions data. So Daniel Batten's analysis was very good on this.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about this one, Danny?
Let me pull up his thread. That's probably the best thing to do.
This is DS Batten on Twitter. Right?
Yeah. Can't wait to get him on the show.
Maybe this year.
Anyway, the New York Times article overstates miners' fossil fuel use by an average of 81.7%.
Yeah, so they had that table at the end of the article. I think you have it in your notes.
Yeah.
Right, that actually shows all of the facilities that they covered and the amount. I think that's it right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a number of things wrong here. So one of the points that, what the name was Daniel Batten?
Daniel Batten,
yeah. One of the points he made was that it was cherry picking within cherry picking, right? So kind of the article, the way it kind of, presents Bitcoin mining is already cherry picking, because of the way they covered demand response, like we talked about. And the other big one is this marginal impact accounting, which we need to talk about as well. But then additionally, the sort of miners that they chose to cover here, I think there's only 2 in their list of 30 something that are among the greenest ones. But there's, at least a dozen other miners that are very, very green. And he lists examples, and they chose not to cover any of those.
And just for anyone listening, this says that Riot Platforms uses 96% fossil fuels, Cypher Mining 92%, US Bitcoin 92%, BitDeer 96%.
Right, but again, that's on the basis of this marginal accounting.
Yes.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
I mean, shout out to our sponsor, Iris Energy, 100% renewable energy. 100% renewable energy.
That's really impressive.
Where are they listed?
Right, exactly. I'm sure they're one of the miners that they chose not to cover here. I wonder why.
Well, I mean, look, first, it could be because they're mainly based in Canada, although we know they're expanding out to the US. But, the idea, if you did a broader, you could say, well, look what's happening here in Canada.
Exactly.
At least make the point, say,
exactly.
There is a company here that's 100%. Why can't it be here? Like push the needle in that direction. So let's get, Danny, can you explain this marginal accounting?
I think it'd probably be best if Lane. I sort of semi-understand it, but I think it'd be better to come from you.
All right, I'll give it my best shot. Can you pull up that visual that we mentioned earlier from Harry's tweet thread, the one you had it on the screen earlier? Yeah. I think it's really helpful for folks who are watching the video to see the visual. So it's interesting actually as well, because marginal accounting is an important part of the Space Mesh protocol, as you guys are aware. Like the way that we enable mining from home is by making it the case that anyone who's mining, it doesn't matter. I'm not here to talk about Space Mesh, but it's nuanced and it's important, and it's a little bit difficult to understand, right? I mean, it is quite literally economics 101, and I think that's the case here as well. So the idea is that you have a stack of sources of energy, and this is the visual that Danny's going to find for us, and this includes, obviously, non-renewable sources. It includes nuclear. It includes it includes gas. It includes coal. And the way it's laid out here, you have the renewable sources on top, right? So
basically,
solar, wind,
the chart is comparing Bitcoin to electric vehicles.
Right. So this chart is not a marginal analysis, but it's a helpful. So this chart's making a different point, and the point that this chart is making is that actually Bitcoin mining, on the whole, is far more sustainable than, in this particular case, they're comparing to electric vehicles. But actually, it's also, Bitcoin mining is also far more renewable on the basis of the information we do have than just the overall, production and consumption mix in the United States. I think I have some numbers on that here. Yeah. So this comes from the Bitcoin Mining Council, right? So they had a survey of miners, bottom-up analysis of 50% of the current hash rate. And of the miners surveyed, 64.6% of the mix is sustainable. So that's defined as wind, solar, hydro, or nuclear. And if you extend that analysis globally, and I'm also quoting more or less directly from, I think this is the response letter that Nick and a few other folks sent to the EPA early last year. So Nick spoke about that on the show. If you extend that analysis globally using conservative assumptions about the energy mix, in the aggregate, Bitcoin mining employs an estimated 58.4%. So this is 53.8%. Those numbers are quite close. And the default US energy mix is 21% sustainable. So it's more than twice as sustainable. And that's using conservative estimates.
So if the Bitcoin Mining Council is surveying the miners themselves,
right,
how do we independently verify or know the validity of the data they're providing? I mean, you might not be able to answer that.
I don't have the answer
But
to that
that's
question.
what I would be doing as a journalist.
Exactly.
That is my point, is that rather, I would be saying, okay, this is what they're saying. How do you independently verify that?
I mean, Bitcoin is all about trustlessness. It should be possible to more or less trustlessly demonstrate that this is true. And I think what we need is just more transparency. And I think that Bitcoin miners, at least in the United States, have been quite open. I mean, we're talking, what was the number here? More than 50% of the current hash rate. I don't know if that's global or just in the United States, but it's a lot.
I mean, this just takes us back to the point. If you put Bitcoin next to EVs,
right,
both emit zero carbon dioxide.
Right.
A Bitcoin miner emits zero CO2. An EV emits zero CO2. They're both consumers of electricity.
Right.
And so therefore, where they source from, those sources can emit CO2. So this is where it gets to you can get to the nub of what's going on here.
Exactly.
Is that if you compare Bitcoin to EVs, they're using way more sustainable resources. So, but these same people aren't writing critical articles of Tesla. These people aren't writing critical articles of Christmas lights or PlayStation.
are darlings of the mainstream media and the government and just kind of the liberal, or world order, so to speak.
Yeah, so
Bitcoin is not.
Yeah, so why? Like, why is this happening? I mean, I think
it's not rational.
Well, I can rationalize it in a couple of ways. I think there are a number of people, journalists, who look at Bitcoin and they've heard of, I think it's that very simple argument. It's the Craig Warmke one. The very simple argument is the longer they've known about it and they didn't buy some, the more bitter they are. They're salty.
Yeah.
These people are salty. They're salty. Other people have made money and they haven't.
Do you know what's interesting about this article? We didn't mention this. So the headline author is this fellow, Gabriel JX Dance. As far as I can tell, he's never written anything about Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or blockchain or mining before. He's someone who has covered things like online suicides and child abuse. I mean, that's great. Those are important topics. But this came completely out of the blue. I'm really curious. It's just strange.
Well, I don't know him.
You'd think like a Nathaniel Popper or someone would be the one to write, this kind of article.
I have big issues with Nathaniel Popper as well now. Because I think he is the perfect example of Craig Warmke's article.
Yeah.
In that he was around a long time. He wrote the first book I read about Bitcoin, Digital Gold.
Yeah.
He was very pro Bitcoin.
What I'm saying is this particular person doesn't seem to have an agenda here. I mean, who knows, right? But
I wonder if this is because you've just listened. He's written very important articles, therefore, about child abuse and online suicide.
Exactly.
They're important emotional subjects. And I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's done a really good journalistic job on those. Yeah. Although obviously I have my doubts now.
Yeah.
Maybe in those circles, he has a very good reputation now. It's like, Gabriel was really important, hard-hitting stuff. Right, let's get him to do this one now. Maybe he's been kind of thrown under the bus, as the credible guy to do it. I don't
believe that. I think this is malice. Like, he could have spoken to so many people who would have put him right very quickly. I don't think we can give him the benefit of the doubt on that.
Didn't he speak to Nick and a few of these other folks?
Yeah, well, he quoted Nick from the letter he sent to
from the letter, right.
But it does make me now want to read his stuff on child abuse and see what he's done there. Is there malice in
it makes you wonder, how accurate those pieces are.
Yeah.
But this goes back to the point I said early on about being sad and frustrated, because it can't help but have this effect where it calls into question literally everything the Times says.
Well, I think it's very hard now to be a proper journalist in a large traditional media organization. One, I don't think you're paid enough. And two, I don't think you have enough freedom. Now, it's not everyone. I think there are very good journalists that work across the spectrum. Even the BBC, which has become some people's whipping boy this week because of Elon Musk, I think there are very good journalists everywhere. But it seems to me now the best journalists are those who are independent.
They're on Substack.
And that's why I'm I haven't spent enough time on their new notes thing. But I have a feeling that, and I hope that is a place that is going to elevate up the best independent writers and thinkers. And by the way, it's not all independent. Some get audience captured because of the incentives. But I feel like Substack is pushing things in the right direction.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, again, was weird to see Elon Musk attack it. But we will come back to that.
Yeah, it gives me hope. Let's, if it's okay with you, with your permission, I just want to finish talking about this marginal accounting thing, because it is important and we didn't really get a chance to properly explain it. But that is apparently where these numbers come from. And this is frankly, the dodgiest piece of this article from my perspective. So if you go back to that stack graphic, sorry, I keep mentioning it. It's just helpful. The way this works is the following, right? So it's kind of like the notion that this, so again, ignore the EVs, ignore the Bitcoin, just focus on one of these stacks, right? There's this existing stack of electrical generation that exists on the grid, right? And let's say it's 36.7% coal and 23.5% gas, et cetera. The idea of marginal is to say that when you add new demand to the grid, right, a marginal unit of additional demand, what source fills that demand, right? And this would be in times of like peak demand, for example. And the reality is, as we talked about a little while ago, that the parts of the grid that are able to respond to that demand, right, are less green. And so these are things like natural gas. Again, I'm not an expert. I don't know exactly where natural gas falls relative. I know it's greener than coal, for example. I guess actually this is probably ordered like roughly, right? So but it's less green than solar or wind. But so the problem with this type of accounting is it kind of says that like there's this set of industries that are incumbent, right? That have been there all along consuming electricity, right? And these are the large industrial use cases that, whether it's chemicals or metallic plants or, the residential use cases, et cetera, right? And Bitcoin is new and EVs are new, right? And we have these new sources of demand. And it's very unfair to them because it's saying that they're adding additional demand to this existing set of demand. And therefore, the fact that the sources of generation that fill that demand are less green, that it's kind of somehow Bitcoin's fault that that's the case, right? And
it's based on their pure existence, the fact that they exist.
Right. But what it does is, and this is the key point, is that it privileges the existing sources of consumption. Okay, let me say that again, because this is the key point. Again, It assumes that this stack exists both of supply and demand, right? And that the existing sources of demand are somehow privileged, right? And they get to claim the greenness of the stuff at the bottom, the stuff at the top there, the solar, the wind, the hydro, et cetera, right? Whereas things like Bitcoin, and of course, EVs and other sort of new sources of demand or high performance computing centers, this kind of stuff, right? Somehow gets the scraps, so to speak, which is to say the less green sources of demand. And I think I have a couple comments here. So this comes from, I think, Nick, right? It's degrowth and it's neo-Malthusian. He uses this term, and I think this is like a really, really brilliant way to talk about it, right? It's anti-innovation as well, right? Because it kind of says that like you should only be bringing new sources of demand onto the grid if you can like afford to bring, your own solar farm or wind farm with you, which actually, Google and Meta are to some extent able to do, but like no one else is able to do that. I just think it's completely absurd, and we need to call that out.
Well, it's just creating this subjective argument
it's
about
very subjective, exactly.
who can use energy, which always breaks down under analysis. Right. Because you only have to bring up Christmas lights. And if you ask any rational person, what is more important, Christmas lights or money for activists working under authoritarian regimes? I'm going to go at the most, look, that's a very niche use case of Bitcoin, but what is the most important is that? What is more important, good money or Christmas lights? Christmas lights are one of the most least required uses of energy.
Yeah, I think that comes from
my subjective world.
That comes from Antonopoulos. He used to say that back in the day. But there's so many others. As I looked into this, over the past year or two, do you know what uses slightly more energy than Bitcoin mining? Gold mining.
Yes.
Right? Printing physical notes, right, on the part of our governments and coins. That costs significantly more than Bitcoin.
Do you remember that chart?
It's also in one of the tweets I retweeted recently. It's the one with the circles, right? It's really incredible. But running banks, right? Printing money, these things cost significantly more energy than Bitcoin. And the fashion industry, while we want to talk about things that are unnecessary depending where you stand, right? 200 to 300 times the energy usage of Bitcoin.
And going back to this, like marginal emissions, any new Tesla straight off the lot is in the exact same boat.
If you use the same absurd type of accounting.
Yeah.
No, they don't count. Just Bitcoin.
And then another point that was made that I think is really important is that the analysis that was done, so they worked with, the Times worked with 2 third parties here to do this. They're totally proprietary, right? When they're calculating the tons of emission here, I guess maybe the fossil fuel mix as well, it's very hard to refute them point by point and to debate them when they're using these kind of closed source. I mean, you guys know I'm an open source maximalist, right? Like a closed source proprietary algorithm for calculating these things. I mean, how do we even engage if they're not telling us how they're calculating these numbers? It's absurd.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing is absurd, and I'm starting.
It's not a standard.
No, and I'm, you know what? I'm getting sick and tired of it. I mean, it just goes back to that point where I just started to, I started to realize, and it's been like a 5-6 year journey of peeling back those onion layers of what I thought was true and I thought was real isn't. And that's been a really hard journey to go on. But I'm with you. It's like, who do you believe? Who do you trust now? We've been so open. No, that wasn't the one I was thinking of.
This one is brilliant. I love this. See, fashion, right? 2,106. What is the unit here? Gigawatts or something, probably, right? But yeah, you see. Oh, tobacco. That's another one. Tobacco uses more than Bitcoin, right? That's not so great for the world.
Yeah, smoking's awesome. Come on, leave it alone.
Gas flaring. So this comes from Cambridge, right? And I think Cambridge is one of the more trusted, reliable sources on hard numbers, as opposed to the sources quoted by the government, for example. Like in that letter that Nick was criticizing. But look, gas flaring alone is more than 3 times, like in other words, could power the entire Bitcoin network more than 3 times over if we were just literally doing nothing more than taking advantage of flared gas, which is 100% wasted.
Well, it's interesting because I look at livestock and manure and Bitcoin as ones that get massively attacked, right? But I never see the same group of people attack fashion. Maybe they do. There's a really good documentary called Fast Fashion, which is by a British journalist. What's her name?
It's 300 times.
You know the ones I mean.
300 times the amount of energy consumed by Bitcoin. I mean, that's enormous.
Yeah, but what about those dresses and things they're going to wear to the Met Gala and
so if
to the Oscars?
My point is not that we shouldn't have fashion. It's that if we reduce the energy consumption of the fashion industry by 1/300, okay, that's 1/3 of a percentage point, it would pay for the entire Bitcoin network and then some. It's so absurd when you look at it in absolute terms like this. Like, why aren't we having this conversation? This is the conversation we should be having.
Because there's never a balanced conversation.
It's just a double standard, and that's.
Yeah, but I think the point is, there's no point attacking any one of those. There's no point.
Exactly, I agree with that, but including Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I'm also getting worked up because it's so frustrating.
It is frustrating because it's holding back everything we're trying to do. Even, I mean, you'll have it, I'll have it. Danny, whenever we trying to talk to people new in, constantly having to deal with nonsense.
The
FUD, the same stuff. How many people are going to read that New York article now and think we're murderers? Think we're baby killers? That's what they are, granny killers. That's what they think we are, because we have to deal with this constant FUD, and it's just lies and bullshit. And that's why I think we need to declare a war on the New York Times.
Yeah, I don't think I would have agreed previously, but I'm coming around to that idea. And it makes me sad and frustrated. I keep saying that.
What do we need to tip you over the edge?
Not a whole lot more than this piece.